What's going on, guys? Welcome back to this video. Today we're going to talk about Linux log analysis, and specifically we're going to discuss authentication logs. So basically this will be about manually analyzing authentication logs. So why do we analyze authentication logs? Basically the purpose of analyzing authentication logs is to discover brute force attacks. So basically we attempt to uncover brute force attacks. They can also be used to troubleshoot login problems, and they can also be used to audit user activity after the authentication. Alright, so let's talk about the file locations. Where do these files exist on the Linux operating system? So as far as file locations are concerned, first we have under var/log/authentication log. This serves as the main authentication log file. It contains all of the authentication logs, the logs in, the logs out, the failed and the successful authentication attempts. And if after successful authentication takes place, it will actually list all of the commands executed after a terminal session is opened. The other file of interest is under var/log/wtemp, and on the same directory we have utemp and we have btemp. So what's the purpose of every one of these files? So the first one, wtemp. In wtemp we can check the login and logout events. So login, login and logout events. It's like keeping track of all the login and logout events. Now as far as for utemp, it is for the recent logins or the currently logged in users. So here we have currently logged in. And lastly, as for btemp, it's for failed login attempts. It's very critical to understand the purpose of every single one of these files when you want to analyze the logs. So basically, first we define what is the purpose of analyzing the logs. Are we investigating brute force attacks? Are we troubleshooting, or are we just auditing? Okay, now let's discuss the tools. What are the tools used for the analysis? Now, because here we highlighted the video as manual analysis of Linux log files, we're going to talk about only command line tools used for analyzing log files. So the first tool is grep, and we have cut, we have sort, we have cat, we have head, tail. I'm sure you are guys familiar with these command line tools used for file processing, because at the end these are files. So in order to extract information and insights from these files, we need file processing tools. Okay. Additionally, for these files, W, U, and btemp, there are specific tools used to analyze these files. One of which is named as UTMP dump. This tool can be applied or executed on any one of these files. But how to download this tool? You can just use apt install utility Linux. This will install you the suite of these tools that will allow you to analyze these files and extract insights. Okay, now after we understand the purpose of these log files, why do we analyze these log files, and the analysis tools, now let's talk about a case study. So the popular example of analyzing these log files, or specifically the authentication logs, is investigating brute force attempts. So what happens in brute force attacks, an attacker tries to guess the password of a user. So after they perform an enumeration on the system, discover possible list of users. So we have root and we have admin. So what would the attacker do? They would supply a word list, password list, okay, along with every single user they have discovered, and run authentication attempts against the targeted server. Usually brute force attacks result in high number of failed attempts. So when there is a high number of failed login attempts in these logs files, we can conclude that there is a possible brute force attack. To investigate further if the attacker was successful. So here we have two outcomes after these brute force or failed attempts. The first outcome is success, and the other outcome is failure. Okay, now after the success, the attacker will log in, and after logging in, this will create another entry in the authentication logs indicating that there is a successful login. Okay, now after the successful login, the attacker will perform all sorts of activities depending on their objective. The other outcome is failure. Now here the attacker will keep generating the high number of failed login attempts. So to find out if the attacker was successful in getting access to the server, we're gonna need to look at first high number of failed attempts followed by a successful attempt with the same user, either root or admin or any other user. How do we find this out? We're gonna need to investigate the authentication logs. Okay, after we discover or after we investigate the authentication logs and we discover that there's a successful login attempt, we can safely use the temp utemp. Specifically, we're going to take a look at utemp to make sure that the attacker was indeed successful in their brute force attacks, because if that's the case, they will have a currently logged in session under utemp, which can be viewed under utemp. So the first step is investigating the failed login attempts in the authentication log file. Once we find a successful attempt, we can use utemp to confirm the session, and then we can follow up again with authentication logs to see what kind of commands the attacker has executed on the terminal server to find out what was their objective. Were they trying to exfiltrate data, or were they trying to create persistence in the system? Let's take an example and see how this works. Okay, so in the scenario here, we have authentication logs and we have wtemp. Remember that wtemp lists lists history of the login and logout events. Remember also that utemp, or the contents of utemp, can be viewed using a specialized tool such as the one we mentioned earlier, utmp dump. So we're going to use this now, utmp dump utemp. Right, so let's go up. While analyzing log files, it's very important to pay attention to the timestamp, because you want to create a chronological chain of events starting from the first failure or the failed attempt, followed by the successful attempt, and then by the commands the attacker executed on the machine. So it's very useful if you take a note of the timestamp. All right, so here we can see a history of the logins along with the user that performed the login operation. And as you can see, lastly, we see another user, Cyber Junkie. And we can take note also of the host name or the IP address from which the login attempt was originated. We see lastly that the last IP address or the last login attempt came from the same IP address, which is totally different from previous IP addresses. We can establish a pattern of safe logins by taking a look at the IP address which originates the login attempt. So you can see here the IP address is the same all the time and the user is the same, which was root. At the end we see a different IP address, right? But with the same username we saw earlier, and then followed by a login attempt from a different username this time and the same IP address. So you have to investigate where does this IP come from. To find the answer, we're going to first need to take a look at the authentication logs. Let's first establish a hypothesis that indeed there was an attack, okay, that started with failed attempts followed by a successful attempt. So first we're going to need to take a look at the failed login attempts. Right, so let's see here, what can we do? Authentication logs. So we can use this one-liner to view statistics about the login attempts started by the user. This will give us, as you can see, that's a combination of cat, grep, cut. Let's first use the first one, the failed attempts. See how many failed attempts we have. Okay, as you can see, guys, we have a lot of failed attempts from different users. So in the first line, March 6, 6/31, we have a failed attempt coming from this username and this IP address targeting the SSH server. We previously saw this IP address while investigating the WTM file, and we saw that there was two logins coming from this IP address, one as the root and other one as cyber junkie. We're gonna have to uncover why this happened. So we see failed login attempts from the same IP address, sometimes using the username admins, other times using backup user, and lastly we see another user, server admin, service account, all coming from the same IP address. It's safe to assume that we have a failed brute force or failed login attempts coming from this IP address, which makes us confirm the theory of a brute force attack taking place. So after these failed attempts, we want to find out if it resulted in successful login. To find the answer, we're going to have to list all of the successful login on the server. So we're going to view the successful logins by using this command. So basically here we are using cat and gripping the word accepted. Okay, take a look here. We have one successful login, the root user, but from this IP address. We have established a baseline of safe activity coming from this IP address. So we're going to ignore this one. Now the other one is another accepted login from the same user, which happens to be root, on the suspicious or coming from the suspicious IP address. If you take a look at the timestamp, it is 6/31/40. So if you take a look, if you go up and see where it started to brute force on the user root, so as you can see, it started at 6/31/39. These were failed attempts, but as you can see, after this very second, we have a successful login on this this timestamp coming from the same IP address. So we have now established a pattern of successful brute force attack against the server. It started with several failed attempts using several users or different users until it ended with a successful attempt from or on using the root user account. And we see another login from the same IP address, but this time it is after 1 minute and 4 seconds of the first attempt. And then after 5 minutes, we have another successful attempt, but from a new user named Cyber Junkie. And this IP address is the same. It looks like the attacker has added the username after they successfully logged in as root. See, there is a gap here in time between this attempt and this attempt. It's a gap of 5 minutes, which means the attacker, after they logged in as root, they have performed a series or executed a series of commands that in turn enable the attacker to log in as different user from the same IP address. So now we have confirmed the hypothesis. There was a brute force attack that took place on the server, which the attack was successful. Now let's find out the mystery of this account. Where did it come from? To find the answer, we're gonna need to investigate again the authentication logs after this timestamp. So let's go ahead and use cat authentication log and use less. I'm gonna ignore these. Remember that that's where it started. Let's see here. At this exact timestamp, there was a login using the user root. Let's go up, start from here. So accepted password for root from this IP address. Let's follow on the chain of events after this login attempt, because all of the things that the attacker did on the machine was after this attempt. Okay, so scrolling down, we see some other attempts. Connection closed by here. It's attacker is concluding the other failed attempts on other users. Scrolling down, you see another login again on this timestamp. All right, now we can see the commands. So here, exactly at this timestamp, 6:34, the attacker has added or created a group named Cyber Junkie, and then added the group to etc groups and etc shadow. Now we started to uncover what happened and where did the Cyber Junkie user come from. So a new group was created, and here attacker created another user named Cyber Junkie with these parameters as the UID and group ID. And as you can see, guys, here the username has a home directory and can log in with bash shell. Okay, scrolling down, we can see here at this exact timestamp, you can see that the attacker has changed or created the password for the username Cyber Junkie. Scrolling down, the attacker also added Cyber Junkie to sudo, the group sudo, so that Cyber Junkie can execute system commands as sudo or otherwise in an elevated mode. Scrolling all the way down, we see the attacker disconnected here, and then they logged in exactly March 6, 6:37, and they logged in as Cyber Junkie, and the session opened for that user. Okay, what happened later? Now the attacker, what they did, they let's see here, they executed a system command. The command was cat to view the password hashes stored at etc shadow, and then the attacker closed the session opened by a user root and continued as Cyber Junkie. And here we can see another command. The attacker downloaded or used curl to download this script, line per. Okay, let's find out what does the script do. I can copy this and open up this. Okay, so basically we can just Google line per GitHub to take a look at the main repository. So it's Linux persistent toolkit. Okay, going back to the logs, later on the attacker closed the sessions. Okay, so now we can conclude what happened. The attacker started with a brute force attack that ended with a successful attempt, and then they created another user for persistence and downloaded a script to establish persistence on the machine. So that is what happened during this case study. So that was it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. and I will definitely see you later.